Eat
but
the whales.
but yes, but I guess what I'm saying is there's place for nuance, and there's some topics so hot like communism where nuance is very difficult to have, and that I feel like with Nazi Germany it was a similar thing at the time.
You want to talk about Jeanette Rankin, who's one of my favorite people?
Mhm.
So Jeanette Rankin was the first woman elected to Congress. She was elected before women's suffrage was passed, the constitutional amendment from Montana. She was elected in 1916. She was one of a handful of people to vote against the U.S. going into the Great War, which was the right call at the time. She was a pacifist Republican as well, coincidentally. She lost her seat, ran again in, was it 1940? Got the seat again, and was the only person to vote against getting into World War II. It was not a unanimous choice. Jeanette Rankin was the one person, and she said you can no more win a war than you can win a hurricane. So she's one of these interesting, and talk about bravery. You're the one vote after Pearl Harbor to say, we're not doing this. And I mean, the pressure she must have been under at the time is, and of course, many people are not interested in hearing her perspective. Oh, she's crazy, she's evil, blah, blah. It's also funny, someone on my Twitter, when I talked about her, goes, maybe she had Hitler's sympathies. Like, yeah, Ms. Rankin was a big fan of Hitler. That's what, you figured it out, guys.
Do you think there's an argument to be made that United States should not have gotten involved in World War II?
Oh, an easy argument. The argument, I talk about this in the New Right. So on internet circles, there's something called Godwin's Law, which means the longer an internet conversation goes on, the probability someone gets compared to Hitler becomes 1. In certain New Right circles, the longer the conversation goes on, the more likelihood that the argument will become we should have ended World War II also becomes 1. And the argument is, at the very least, stay back, let Hitler and Stalin kill each other off, and then go in and knock off the weaker one. And you're going to be destroying 2 nightmare systems. And I think that's an easy argument to make. Now, it's hard to pull off after Pearl Harbor, but in terms of strategy, I don't think that's a tough sell.
What about after Pearl Harbor?
I mean, that's what I was saying. After Pearl Harbor, how are you going to sell that to the people? The argument is, blah, blah, the Holocaust. The Holocaust is, there's no scenario where that doesn't happen, really, if unless you're going in way earlier. But even so, Hitler had said, if the Jews launch another war, we're going to wipe them from the face of the earth. So the Jews are being held hostage by Hitler as an argument for this. Another thing he did, which was, diabolical, is in order to make it that people could not accept Jews as refugees, if they were going to leave Germany, they had to be penniless. So now it's not like they're coming over with money and they can take care of themselves. No, they're going to be completely destitute.
It makes it harder to accept them, yeah.
Millions of destitute people who don't speak the language. It's a tough sell.
So speaking of Goodwin's Law, what do you make of this condition, Trump derangement syndrome?
Yeah.
And the idea of comparing Trump to Hitler?
I think it's despicable. And I'll give you an example, something parallel that I think more people should be regarding as despicable. Earlier in 2020, we were all told that unless we were in Syria immediately, the Kurds were going to be exterminated. They invoked the Holocaust. This is going to be another genocide. And if you're not for this, you're basically, forcing another Holocaust. None of the people who used this argument, we didn't go to Syria, the Kurds were not exterminated, they just vanished from the news, had any consequences for using this kind of comparison. So I think it's really kind of fatuous. And I think it's amazing that people think Hitler's the only tyrant who ever lived. Like, everyone who's bad is specifically Hitler. You know how you know he's not Hitler? Because you can tweet at him and no one comes to your house to kill your family. Like, that's kind of a big difference. Also, the difference between Trump and many of his critics is that his grandchildren will be raised as Jews. So that's also kind of and Deborah Lipstadt talks about this a lot. The New York Times at the time, there's another book called Buried by the Times, which talks about the New York Times in the World War II. Because the idea that Jews weren't white was a Hitler idea. The New York Times at the time, Salzberger, wanted to be against this idea. So they specifically downplayed the anti-Semitism as opposed to the Nazis are being oppressive. So the argument that you can separate Nazism from anti-Semitism is a historical debate people have. And my perspective is, I do not find it convincing that you can separate those two. I think anti-Semitism was essential to Nazism. I think Nazism and Mussolini's fascism have very big differences. And
do you think anti-Semitism was fundamental to who Hitler was, or was it just a? So this is the interesting thing: is like, was it a tool that he saw as being effective?
No, he believed it.
So why do you see those as intricately connected? Could Hitler have accomplished the same amount or more without the Holocaust?
Yeah, because think about how many resources you had to divert at a time where you're having Operation Barbarossa with Stalin.
So why are they connected? Why are they so connected? Is it because Hitler was insane, or was he a bad strategist, or what?
He was obviously a bad strategist. He had no need to open a second front. His generals, my understanding, told him this is crazy. It didn't work out for him at all. I mean, to draw Russia and her resources into that war, it makes absolutely no sense in retrospect. There's a book about, I forget what it's called, where it talked about him at that point was just high all the time on amphetamines, and that could have affected his thinking.
Yeah, there's a really good book on drugs.
Yeah.
During the, I forget what it's called, but yeah, it's a really good one.
But it was, I mean, scapegoating is a big part and parcel of the Nazi mythology, and this kind of one universal figure to explain, this kind of, skeleton key.
But it could have been the communists. I mean, that could have been the source of the hatred. So, like,
but the communists didn't get Germany into World War I, like he said the Jews did.
It seems to me that the atrocity of the Holocaust is the reason we see Hitler as evil.
No, the reason we see Hitler as evil is because of World War II propaganda still. Because we don't see Stalin as evil.
Right, that's my
We don't see
main
Mao
point.
as evil to that extent. I think that...
Why? Like, why would you say that?
You know why? Because
the nature of that propaganda.
Because I think a lot of the problem for the certain type of mentality is Hitler didn't mass murder equally. So as long as you're killing just one group, it's a problem. But if you're murdering everyone equally, all of a sudden it's like, what are you going to do? So the fact, like you were saying, the Holodomor is not common knowledge. The fact that Mao's 50 million dead are not common knowledge, and Richard Nixon can be raising a glass to him in China. These are things that I think the West has not done a good job reconciling.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Frank.
Frank who?
Thank you for being my friend, Michael.
And the heart attacks will say, "Thank you for being my friend."
This is
You got to do like this.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now back to Hitler. Do you think Hitler could have been stopped? We kind of talked about it a little bit in terms of what is the brave thing to do in the time of Nazi Germany. But do you think, I mean, I'm not even going to ask about Stalin in terms of could Stalin have been stopped? Because probably the answer there is no. But on the Hitler side, could Hitler have been stopped?
I think a lot of these things, a lot of luck has to play with it. He was almost assassinated. If you mean by like the West, it's very hard. I mean, yeah.
By the German people too. I mean, could like, if we're politically speaking, there was a rise to power through the 30s, through the 20s, really. I mean, like, can whoever, it's not about Hitler, it's about that kind of way of thinking, that totalitarian control that always leads to trouble, sometimes at a mass scale. Could that have been stopped in Germany or maybe in the Soviet Union?
Well, I think this is one of the best arguments against radicalization in the States, which is how do you engage when you have like 30% of the population who are members of a party which is dedicated to systemically overthrowing the existing democracy. Stalin gave orders that the communists, who had a pretty sizable population, the Reichstag, that their target shouldn't be the Nazis, but the liberals and the social democrats. And they invented the term social fascist for them. So instead of, they're just like jihadis, instead of taking their sights on Nazism, they set their sights on the moderates because they figured the choice between Hitler and us, we're going to win. And this was a huge gamble, and it they were all killed or had to flee, and the ones who fled were killed also by Stalin. So, to my understanding, so this is an easy way where he could have been certainly heavily mitigated.
What about France and England, that it was obvious that Hitler was lying and they wanted peace so bad that they were willing to put up with it even after Czechoslovakia? Like this is the anti-pacifist argument, which is like they should have threatened military force more.
But then the other anti-pacifist argument is, if you're going to remember, Barack Obama had the red line. If you cross this red line in Syria, we're going to go in. And Assad, whatever, was like, yeah, cool. And he's like, oh, okay, well, sorry. So if you're a threatening force, there's the great song lyric, don't show your guns unless you intend to fight, right? So if it's very clear with free countries through what's in the press, whether the institutional will is there to follow through on these threats. So I think it would have been very hard for Chamberlain to rally the British people to take on Hitler just after the suffering that Britons took on the Great War, they still, obviously, it means so much more to them than it does to us in the West.
What do you make of Churchill then? Like, why was Churchill able to rally the British people? Why was he... do you give much credit to Churchill for being one of the great forces in stopping Hitler in World War II?
I don't think that's really in dispute. I think he was very much regarded as this kind of the right man at the right time. And I think Chamberlain took a gamble. The expression "peace in our time" was Neville Chamberlain when he signed the appeasement with Hitler, and he goes, we now have peace in our time, now go home and get a good night's sleep. That's what he said. Because he's like, all right, he's going to stop here. And it's not impossible that if you just gave him, like if you gave Saddam Hussein Kuwait, it's not impossible that he's not going to, invade Saudi Arabia next, something like that.
But see, okay, but everything I've read, it's like, of course, there's it's not impossible. But when you're in the room with Hitler, you should be able to see, like, man to man. Like to me, a great leader should be able to see past the facade and see, like yes, everything in life is a risk, but it seems like the right risk to take with Hitler. It's surprising to me. I know there's charisma, but it's surprising to me people did not see through this facade.
I really hate the idea of hindsight and everything being 2020. And I think it's a very good idea generally. I'm speaking generally, not in this specific instance, to give our ancestors more credit than we tend to give them. Because people often, here's a great example from another context, which is lightning rods. People always talk about religious people being stupid and superstitious, and they weren't. They often were very well reasoned. And an example of this is lightning rods, which is every year, whatever town, the church was the tallest building. And that's the one that always got hit by lightning and got caught on fire. Now, it's a coincidence that it's always the church? Like, that makes logical sense. Now, they didn't realize, well, it's because it's the tallest and therefore that attracts the electricity. And in fact, when they invented lighting rods, this is a controversy because it's like, well, how is God going to show his displeasure if now it's striking this lightning rod, not burning down the church? So a lot of times things are a lot more coherent than we give them credit for. And again, Chamberlain he's the head of a parliamentary party. So he does not have the freedom, in a sense, that a Hitler would, to be like, all right, we're doing this again, boys. We don't know what it's like in the room with Hitler. Come on, that's we really have no idea.
But I think you have to think about that, right?
Yeah, but I can very easily see him in the room being very calm and charming, and then you think, okay, the guy with the speeches is the act, and he's putting on a show for his people, and this is the real one.
Okay, so let's take somebody as an example. Let's take our mutual friend Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why saying his name makes my voice crack.
Because you're scared he can hear you. It's like Beetlejuice. Volodya.
So there's a lot of people that...
Was he the one who built you?
No, that was a collaboration. It's a double-blind engineering effort where I was not told of who my maker was. There's a backstory, but
There's a talking cricket. Pinocchio.
mm.
You'll be a real boy someday.
I talk about him quite a bit because I find him fascinating. Now, there's a really important line that people say, like, why does Lex admire Putin? I do not admire Putin. I find the man fascinating. I find Hitler fascinating. I find a lot of figures in history fascinating, both good and bad. And the figures, just as you said, that are with us today, like Vladimir Putin, like Donald Trump, like Barack Obama, it's difficult to place them on the spectrum of good and evil, because that's only really applies to like when you see the consequences of their action in a historical context. So there's some people who say that Vladimir Putin is evil. And based on our discussion about Hitler, that's something I think about a lot, which is in the room with Putin. And there's also a lot of historical descriptions of what it's like to be in the room with Hitler in the 1930s. There is a lot of charisma. In the same way, I find Putin to be very charismatic in his own way. The humor, the wit, the brilliance, there's a simplicity of the way he thinks that really, if taken at face value, looks like a very intelligent, honest man thinking practically about how to build a better Russia constantly, almost like an executive.
Yeah.
Like he looks like a man who loves his job in a way that Trump, for example, doesn't.
Right.
Meaning like he loves laws and rules and how to...
There's no adversarial press, so that's going to help.
Yes.
And he's popular with his people. That's also going to help enormously.
But I'm talking about strictly the man, directly the words coming out of his mouth. Like all the videos and interviews I watched, I'm based on that. Not the press, not the reporting. You can just see that here's a man who's able to display a charisma that's not, like I can see, that's why I love Joe Rogan. Is like, you could tell the guy is genuine and is a good person. And like you could tell immediately that like once you meet Joe that he's going to be offline also a good person. You could tell there's like signals that we send that are like difficult to kind of describe. In the same way you can tell Putin is like he genuinely loves his job and wants to build a better Russia. There's the argument that he is actually an evil man behind that charisma, or is able to assassinate people, limit free press, all those kinds of things. Like that's, what do we do with that? So what do human beings like journalists, or what do other leaders when they're in the room with Putin do with those kinds of notions in deciding how to act in this world, in deciding what policy to enact, all those kinds of things? Just like with Hitler, when Chamberlain's in the room with Hitler, how does he decide how to act?
Well, let's go back to like my wheelhouse, which is North Korea, right? So when your entire world is based on being against Trump and everything Trump does is buffoonery or counterproductive, the conclusion of your reporting is going to be pretty much given. I was very hopeful that there would be some positive outlooks or outcomes, rather, of Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un. It looked like there was a space for things to go a bit better. I talked about it a lot at the time. And Trump was under no illusions about who he was dealing with. People pretend that, he was kind of naive. He had one of the refugees at his State of the Union, lifting up his crutch. The first thing he sat down and talked to Xi Jinping about in Mar-a-Lago right after he became inaugurated was North Korea. Barack Obama said that when he sat down Trump in the White House during the transfer of power, he said North Korea is the biggest issue. So I think a good leader whether or not you consider Trump a good leader, has to be aware of, all right, I'm going to have relationships of some kind, even if it's adversarial, with some really evil, horrible people, which Kim Jong-un clearly is.
Well, but I don't think there's anybody that has a perspective that North Korean Kim Jong-un or Il are not evil, right?
Correct.
But in 1930s Germany, isn't it a little bit more nuanced? And
yeah,
difficult?
because Hitler hasn't done anything yet, and he's just a blowhard, and he's an anti-Semite, sure, but he's...
What about like before the war breaks out? Like, what about the basic actionable anti-Semitism when you're like just attacking, hurting?
We're talking about Kristallnacht, or talking about the Night of Long Knives?
Kristallnacht. Okay. So it's the Night of the Broken Glass.
Yeah. No, Long Knives is when he assassinated a bunch of his people. That was something different.
Yeah, so like when you're actually attacking your own citizenry.
Yeah, that was universally condemned, Kristallnacht, and that was very shocking. Its level of barbarism to the West, because I think we still want to believe, understandably, that things aren't as bad as they seem. We would rather. This is why the North Korea book I did, Dear Reader, is used in a humorous framework, because if you have to look, it's like looking to the sun. If you stare at it straight on, it's very hard to do. So you have to kind of look at it obliquely, and then you kind of realizing the enormity of the depravity. And again, pogroms in Russia had been a thing for a very long time. And there's a difference between, okay, we're going to sack these villages and persecute people, and we're going to systematically exterminate them. There's still levels of evil and depravity.
So you did write the book, Dear Reader, on Kim Jong-il.
Yeah.
Dear Reader, the unauthorized autobiography of Kim Jong-il.
Yeah.
So that's the previous leader of North Korea.
Correct.
Current one is the
Jong-un.
No creativity on the naming.
Well, no, this is intentional because it's a throwback to the dad.
So there's been only 3 leaders in North Korea. So we've talked about the history of Hitler and Stalin, men like these. I think it's important to understand that the history of those kinds of humans. The history of North Korea is not well written about or understood, which is why your book is exceptionally powerful and important. So maybe in a big, broad way, can you say who is Kim Jong-il as a man, as a leader, as a historical figure that we should understand, and why should we understand them?
So I wrote Dear Reader by going to North Korea and getting all their propaganda, which is translated into several languages, because the conceit is everyone on Earth is interested in them and wants to mirror their ideology.
And he died in 2011.
2011, yeah.
And you wrote the book in 2012.
I went there in 2012. I wrote the book, came out in 2014. So Kim Jong-il is, though not an intellect, North Korea's version of Forrest Gump, in that when they write their history, whenever something happens, he's there. And by telling his life story, it's in the first person, he's telling the history of North Korea. So I wanted to write the kind of book where in one book, and it's the kind of reading you could do in the beach or the bathroom, you're going to get the entire history and know everything you need to know about North Korea in one accessible outlet. And it's what people don't appreciate about North Korea. There's several things: how bad it is, and this didn't happen overnight. This was very systemic. That what this family did to that country, where piece by piece they did everything in their power to hermetically seal it from the rest of the world, ramp up the oppression, keep any information from coming in. And, they're very creative and innovative in their style of manipulation and control. So there is a farcical element. Let me give you an example. So people in the West kind of get it wrong. They talk about when Kim Jong-il played golf for the first time, he gets 17 holes in one. There's this one story about Kim Jong-il shrinking time. And this is a story of how, and it sounds supernatural, but it's not. So Kim Jong-il is at a conference, the Dear Leader, and someone is giving a talk. And while that person is giving a talk, Kim Jong-il is taking notes and working on his work, and he has an aide who keeps interrupting him with questions, and the speaker keeps stopping. And Kim Jong-il says, "Why are you stopping?" He goes, "I see you're doing these other things." And he goes, No, I can do all these things at once. And everyone's shocked. And they said, this is why Kim Jong-il looks at time not like a plane, but like a cube, and he can shrink time. And my friend goes, do they mean multitasking? And yes, Kim Jong-il is the only person in North Korea who's capable of multitasking. So in order to elevate him, they basically make everyone else in North Korea completely, incompetent. And that has a purpose, because should the leader go away, this country's going to collapse overnight. So they laugh in the West about all these newspapers show him, at the factory, and he's at the fish hatchery, at the paper plant. They say the difference in North Korea is that the leader goes among the people and does what he calls field guidance. So he will go in that farm and be like, this is what you need to do. And he'll go here, and he's so smart. He's good at everything. And thanks to him for sharing his wisdom with us. And he's not removed from the people like in every other country.
Why does that seem to go wrong with humans, do you think? That this kind of, the structure where there's this one figure, this authoritarian, this totalitarian structure where there's one figure that's a source of comfort and knowledge.
Kim Jong-il is not good at farming. Kim Jong-il is not good at the machinery. It's all a complete lie. Yeah. Or the things he'll point out will be things that are completely obvious. So here's another example that they use. In North Korea, they have something called the Tower of the Juche idea, which is an obelisk, which looks like the Washington Monument, but it's completely different because it's got this like plastic torch at the top. And they talk about in their propaganda how all the architects got together and they said, oh, we should make this the second tallest stone obelisk in the world. And Kim Jong-il says, no, let's make it the tallest. They're like, oh, we never thought of this before. And the way it's presented as if, and like he's the first person to think of this, like these architects are having a brainstorming session, the Tower of the Juche idea. They're like, all right, we got to do something innovative to put North Korea on the map. What can we do? How about second biggest? He's going to go for this. And then he's like, we never thought of this. It's so, because I present it at face value, people sometimes say the book's a satire. It's not a satire. I downplayed all this stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a farce. Here's another example. North Korea is very big, and I think Russia is to some extent too, on amusement parks, fun fairs, they call them in the British style, because this is a chance for the people to all get together. And there was this amusement park, it's almost like South Park, Cartman, where there's all these rides, and Kim Jong-il's like, I'm not going to let any elderly or children take these rides until I put myself in danger and ride them myself. And they go, but dear leader, it's drizzling. And he goes, no, I have to make sure these rides are going to be safe for everyone, even during the light rain. They go, well, can we go on these rides with you? No. I have to be the courageous one. And he's riding all the rides, and they're standing there crying at his courage. Yeah. But that's and you ask all the thing in one power. It's like, listen, I'm quite confident that those fun fair engineers are in a position to ride Modest Mouse, whatever it's called, by themselves and be like, yeah, okay, this is good for the kids. Although to be fair, some of those amusement parks are pretty rusty and dangerous.
Yeah, but that kind of propaganda, I guess what I'm playing a devil's advocate is like, it's comforting and it's useful, but it does seem that naturally leads to an abuse of power.
It's not. How can it be used correctly? No one person has the intellect or the mind to understand the entirety of an economy, let alone every individual field of interest.
Well, for example, you can have an artificial intelligence system that understands the entirety of it.
Your affect just completely changed. The mask slipped. Yes, you could have an artificial intelligence system.
But like, the question is, can that mean like the human version of that is like you can hire a lot of experts, right? You can be an extremely good manager.
Yeah, and then, since everything's dynamic, they're not gonna have the data to kind of manage it well.
It seems that there's like what George Washington allegedly did. It seems like most humans are not able to fire themselves. You're not able to like.
Yeah, you're right.
Ultimately be a check on your own power, but that's not. If I was like if I was creating a human, is like that's not an obvious bug of the system that we would not be able to fire ourselves to know when we have. I mean, it seems like that's something you have to know always. Like that's something I often wonder is like, am I wrong about this?
Well, this is what we talked about earlier. What are the safety valves
Yeah.
to make sure that, okay, if I am incorrect or my knowledge is finite, Plato's cave kind of thing, what mechanisms are in place that my mistake or limited information isn't going to have deleterious consequences? And North Korea does not really have that. And as a result, they had polio in the 90s.